Okay, guys. I think we'll start on time today. We have a somewhat smaller group, but as always, our webinars will be available on our website eventually for future reference. Thank you so much for joining us today at our January webinar for Everything Parkinson's from Pacific Movement Disorders Center. Happy New Year. As most of you are aware, we have a different topic every month. So far, we haven't run out of anything new to cover, for the next 11 months. So that's 24 unique topics that we've identified for talking about Parkinson's disease. We're excited to have our social worker and American Parkinson Disease Association liaison, Sheila Moore, speaking with us today. Obviously, Sheila has given talks for Everything Parkinson's in previous months, and you're welcome to go to our website to review some of the webinars she's given in the past. That website is www.pacificmovement.org. Today, she's going to be talking to you about planning and resources that are available for people who have Parkinson's, who may have cognitive impairments or other advanced stages of Parkinson's and require further help at home. So without further ado, please welcome Sheila Moore.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Petrosian. Thank you so much. Happy New Year. Happy New Year to everyone who's joining us this afternoon. I appreciate you being here this afternoon and having the opportunity to begin our conversation about somewhat of a challenging topic, but I think that we'll talk today about maybe reframing and having the opportunity to discuss some resources and some next steps. So I chose to entitle the webinar today, "It Takes a Village, Managing and Planning with the Diagnosis of Dementia," because I really feel like it does take a village. There's lots of opportunities to gather people around, to be able to review resources and to not only identify need, but to do what we can to link with resources. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So welcome. Welcome with your concerns, welcome with your questions, welcome with everything that you bring to this webinar today. So the goals for today are to begin a discussion about dementia and Parkinson's disease from a psychosocial perspective. I'm hoping that we'll be able to put a frame around sometimes a sensitive and difficult topic, but certainly something that when the people that I have the great pleasure of providing services to those with Parkinson's disease, many concerns about memory, concerns about cognition are certainly at the forefront and are worthy, and it's an important topic to discuss and to frame. Today, I'd like to talk about and bring caregivers into this frame, because particularly when we're talking about dementia, we're talking about advancing memory changes, that caregivers play a very important role. And it's important that the spotlight is on not only the person with Parkinson's disease who has memory changes, but as the care partner as well. And I'm going to spend some time outlining some important steps, some hard resources, but also some, I think what's important for me today is to talk about to create this frame for you. So let's get started. So like I discussed, it can be a challenging topic. And it's, like I said, I have the great fortune of sitting with many people who have Parkinson's disease. And that's a very big concern, that the changes, the fog, the confusion, the memory changes, the trouble finding words, it's real. But not everyone who has Parkinson's disease will develop dementia, but it certainly can be part of Parkinson's disease. So this morning, I'm hoping to be real, to be able to discuss openly, and then offer some information and tips to support you and your care partner. So as I was thinking about today, I have to say that giving these webinars sometimes can be challenging because I don't have the opportunity to see you. And when it's some of the more tender or challenging topics, I'd love to be able to see your faces. And I'd love to be able to, if we were in person, be able to ask, what brings you here today? What are your concerns? What do you bring to the webinar? What do you bring to a talk when we're talking about planning and managing if the diagnosis is dementia? And so I brainstormed that perhaps what might bring people here today would be a family history of dementia, concerns that might be something that would be part of their journey or their experience. It may be that you have concerns that you've been noticing and you come here to find out a little bit more. It might be that some of you are interested in wanting to know the broadest info about Parkinson's disease. What does this encompass? What might I be facing? It might be that you've begun having conversations with Dr. Diaz and Dr. Petrosian about memory changes and what that might mean. Or you might be coming about the what ifs, bringing the what ifs to today. And it could be fears about the future, or you could be tuning in and you could be a care partner for someone with PD, concerned about what you're noticing and what you're seeing, or you could be here together as a couple. I just wanted to kind of put it out there that whatever brings you here today, we want to honor your process. And really, I just want to say, because this is such a broad topic, that this is really just the beginning of the discussion. That I'm going to be just a lot of introductions, a lot of talking about what might be next, ways that we can frame this so that you can continue to explore, continue to prepare, and continue to work together with all of us on your team. So your journey, like Dr. Petrosian says often, is when we see one person with Parkinson's disease, we see one person with Parkinson's disease. And each road is different. No one knows the twists and turns that will come. When I was reviewing this, I was thinking there are twists and turns, and oftentimes we think of those twists and turns as challenges, and sometimes those twists and turns might be something that's surprising in a not so negative way in terms of who might be available, who shows up, what's out there for you. And when there's a diagnosis of dementia, the help and support does not stop on this journey. And that's another very important message that I want all of you to hear today, that if things change, as care needs change, as you're preparing for the future, there will be no point at any juncture that your team at the Movement Disorder Center, at PNI, we're going to talk a little bit about the village, that those things stop. It's actually, I think that the circles that move out just have the opportunity to pull in and support you more. So that's my hope. So I'm going to leave all the technical and scientific discussion to Dr. Petrosian and Dr. Diaz. But I did want to talk about it so that we can lay the landscape for the more of a discussion today. And so I just wanted to, in very general terms, what is dementia? And dementia is a general term for loss of memory and other mental abilities that are severe enough to interfere with daily life. And I think that's the key. It is caused by, at least from my perspective, it is caused by physical changes in the brain. Alzheimer's is the most common type of dementia, but there are many kinds. And when with the diagnosis of Parkinson's disease, there can be a dementia with Parkinson's, and there can also be Lewy body dementia. But I'm not going to focus on the technicalities of that, but talk more in terms of what, from a psychosocial perspective, in terms of needs, in terms of things that might change, that we can reframe and plan and provide resources for. So when I think about dementias, when I think about memory changes that might start interfering with daily functioning, I think about the impact. I think about how one gets through the day with these changes. They impact the changes in need for assistance, the changes in the kinds of need for assistance. Behaviors can change sometimes. Help may be necessary. Help might be inevitably necessary. Long-term care planning remains important with an added focus. So I know that we've talked about long-term care planning and a needing from the community in terms of the changes that naturally come with Parkinson's disease. But this long-term planning adds an extra focus when we're talking about memory changes. Care partners take on a different role when memory changes become a part of the interference of a day, and the village expands and resources expand. Also, with this impact of how one gets through one's day, the way needs change, there's also a component, and as a clinical social worker, I can't neglect this, that there are absolutely emotional factors that come into play. Perhaps it's fears, anxieties, depression, grappling with the acceptance of new information. Care partners' roles may change, and they become more of an active partner, which may create some need for navigation in terms of communication and more communication. There's, of course, stress and ambivalence. Moving forward with new information sometimes can be overwhelming, and it can be a really hard and challenging time for not only you but the whole family and your community that surrounds you. So I'm hoping that today, or this during this hour, we can talk about framing a response to a diagnosis of dementia, or framing a response when memory changes become more of a challenge. So I'd like to think of that frame as kind of a three sides: information, support, and planning. And when we're framing this response, I know it's almost feels trite, but the fact that information, that knowledge is power, and I really have to say that, particularly when we're dealing with any chronic health issue, that knowledge is indeed power, because it helps you to be able to be the driver and remain in control, to be able to gather information so that you can make well-informed decisions. And you can know in terms of what comes next in terms of planning. Reviewing resources, I think, is a part of the next steps when the diagnosis is dementia, or when the diagnosis impacts your daily functioning and getting through your day related to memory changes. And then I also think support is a really important piece. And I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about this, because I think that often we talk about, we'll just review the slide, and then I'll talk a little bit more. So this concept of the village, that it does take a village, and what does this really mean? And when I think about how we rally around, or if I were to sit with you and talk about some care planning, like what's happening, what might be need, and how can we rally resources? We can think about this in terms of two different perspectives. That's how my problem-solving mind thinks about these things. One, there's the formal resources, and then there's the informal resources. And I have to say that each has its part, and that when we're talking about a village, we certainly can think about the formal resources. The Movement Disorder Center, Dr. Petrosian, Giselle, Dr. Diaz, myself, we're all part of a formal network of services. But there's also the informal network, what I call the informal network. It's your family and friends, the people who are there, who absolutely can be. And I would encourage a discussion about, and an inventory to think about it, of who might be part of that village, who might be your formal team members, your formal part of the village, and who might be the informal, the people who will be there to support you, who you can pull in to have different tasks, different roles, who can be of help to not only you, but to your care partner as well. And so this village can be, and I would feel would be essential for your needs now, and as your needs might change, particularly if memory changes are part of some of the concern and dementia. So, and without doubt, this includes the needs of the care partner, which becomes essential as needs change and we all move forward. And I want to really, today I'm going to spend some time talking about how we focus on care partners and what care partners I'm hoping we'll think about in terms of sustaining and becoming active members in this village, in this care team. So I do want to say a word of caution. I say in notes from the field. So I've been caring for and being of service to those who have memory changes and their families for about 3 decades now. And it has been both a personal and professional passion, and it has been fulfilling. And I often think way back in the day, when we were doing evaluations and assessments, we would often find that people would come in, because it was at a different time, technology was different, that people would come in at different stages. Now what I'm seeing, and what is immensely not only gratifying, but empowering, is that we are at a point where people are self-identifying and coming in at a very different stage, very different time. So the opportunity to educate and empower, to be able to give you information so that you can take control, it's amazing. And I hope that you will take every opportunity. And I also want to say the caveat to that is that with information, we'll talk about some of those caveats, with information, it can be overwhelming. So I say here, notes from the field is to pace yourself. Sometimes the information that we have is going to, I would caution and encourage you to think about what feels comfortable for you. Some people are ravenous in terms of gathering information. And that's how they cope, and that's how they work, and that's they want to know it all. They want to know it all now. It helps in terms of the planning. And some people have a harder time gathering that information. So I just want to say that as you're planning and as you're moving forward, and as I'm talking about resources and gathering information, that you pace yourself. If it gets to be challenging, there's no need to push here. There's no need to do this alone. I'm here, your team at Pacific Brain Health Center, Dr. Petrosian and Giselle, we're all here to help you pace and gather information. I'm going to take a broad stroke, but I will also start my invitation now I invite you to meet with me if you'd like, that we can make this a very distinct and personal plan for you. And I'm going to say, beware of the internet. I find that the internet, we Google everything now. You don't know something, oh, Google it. Ask Siri, ask Alexa. And it's really great to have access to information that way. But it also can be quite daunting. And sometimes it can take us down, I'll say rabbit holes. It can take us down different pathways that just create anxiety and fear. And so I just encourage you to beware of the internet, and not only in terms of overwhelming with information, but in terms of, I think, accessing good information. And certainly we're here to help and guide you. And I'm going to say, please use your greatest resource and advocate, which I think are our movement disorder specialists, Dr. Petrosian and Dr. Diaz and Giselle. The concerns and the questions that you might have, easily we can go to Google. But, like one of the slides, that the heart was made out of 2 thumbprints. And our journey is absolutely personal and unique. And sometimes it takes a different and personal touch. And so I just encourage you that the information highway out there is broad and long, but I will also encourage you that if it gets overwhelming, that it's okay to pace yourself and get some guidance from the people who know you and who can help guide in a pointed and focused way. So let's talk a little bit about the next steps. So you bring your concerns about a diagnosis of dementia or concerns about memory. You're worried, you might have a history. You're a care partner wondering about what's next. And so I think I wrote down these the top 10 resources when the diagnosis is dementia or the diagnosis has to do with memory changes. And I think that you probably hearing this over and over again, but I think that we can't stress this enough, that one of the first and foremost important documents and things to get started in terms of the planning would be a durable power of attorney for healthcare. Also, the durable power of attorney for finances is helpful, because if the memory changes become advanced, that there might be a time when you would need someone to make decisions on your behalf. And so that information becomes important. And I have another slide. We can delve into that a little bit more. I would really encourage everyone to take a real and honest look at your finances. We can talk about villages and we can talk about resources. It's super important to know. I mentioned in one of the slides, to be real is to take a really honest look at what you have and what might be areas that we would need to turn to different resources in the community. What services you can purchase, and what services that you might need that the community offers. And there's lots of ways that we can do this. So I would encourage everyone to take a real and honest look at finances when we're talking about long-term care, particularly within the frame of memory changes. As I was preparing this talk today, a colleague of mine asked if I knew about the Dementia Healthcare Directive Addendum. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in the next slide. And I hadn't, but it's very similar to the durable power of attorney for healthcare, in that you get to make choices about your healthcare if you are in a position where you can't speak on your behalf. You identify someone to help you make the decision so that you remain in the way my frame is, that you remain in control. No matter what is happening, these are my decisions. These are my witnesses. You speak to someone. Will you be the person that will speak for me, will be my voice if I can't, for some reason, if I don't have a voice? And this Dementia Healthcare Directive is similar and I think all of us should be thinking about it and filling these out, that in case we were to have memory changes, in case a diagnosis of dementia was part of our journey, that we could say, these are my choices. If my cognition changes, if my memory changes, please help me have a voice when I might not be able to speak for myself. There's also another great resource out there. Again, this is out on the internet, and I'll talk to you about that in a few minutes in the next slide. But it's called a Dementia Decoder, and I feel like it's a really good tool. I would encourage you to take a look at it, and I'll give you the link. It offers you the opportunity to review what your questions might be, so that you can generate a list for your provider, so that when you go to your provider, whether you're someone who does not have memory changes, concerned about it, at the very beginning, been diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, dementia, or you're a care partner, that you can answer. It helps you kind of almost like a resource tree, where you can go through and bring a document to your care provider and say, these are my concerns, these are my questions about treatments and my memory changes, or treatments and my concerns, treatments and my about what might be coming, treatments and if you're a care partner, treatments and quality of life. And it's just really a good tool, I feel. Of course, we talk about this in terms of identifying your support network, for lack of a better term, I'm going to call it a village. Identify your support village. And I want to say, I've really, like I said, kind of from a historic perspective, in terms of my work with people who have memory changes and at various stages and their families, to identify your support network is really powerful. And I want to say that when I say a support network, one might think that it might be a large group of people. And it can be one person who will be your voice. It can be one person who you can talk to about your concerns. It doesn't necessarily, I was thinking about, I think probably all of you here would know about that, kind of that Norman Rockwell kind of idea of what is family, who might be those people who can help us. And I have to say that in my experience, in my history working in this community, that sometimes it's the what I would say some of the usual suspects, people that you would think, but also some of the people that you wouldn't think that might be on your team. You'll want to think broadly. And it's not only who you would want on your team, and I'll speak frankly, it's people who you might not want on your team, might not want in your village. And that's okay. That's okay. This is where you have control. This is where you have a point of control, where you can say, these are the people that I trust, that I want in my inner circle to help me in terms of talking through things, of thinking through things, of being present for me, of maybe being a voice, maybe being my durable power of attorney, identifying people to be in that circle. These are the people who are in my very intimate circle. Then here's my informal village, here's my formal village, and here's my community. It's all about making sure that the village that you craft, that you create, is going to be a powerful one for you. And number does not matter. For me, creating your village is about who you trust and who can be there for you. So, for example, you may have a son or daughter, one who lives here, one who lives on the East Coast, just for an example. You may have a closer relationship with your son. He may be someone that you would identify, not necessarily someone in geographic proximity. There's lots of things to think through. And for sure, your wishes, your feelings, your thoughts about this in terms of crafting this village is paramount and important. So when you're talking about this village, I think that it's important to identify, to hear you and help you plan and can carry your voice. And I talked a little bit about this already, but it might be that your durable power of attorney for healthcare is your point person. It might be that it's someone else who has a different touch and tone in terms of communication, because as we're going to talk in just a minute, communication becomes very important. When you're talking about making sure that your needs are heard, making sure that your needs will be met, and making sure that your village knows and can anticipate how needs might change. And when I think about when people know what might change, I think in many ways we're talking about a moving target. We don't know how things change. Everybody's experience will be different. But for me, the idea is that the people on your team will be flexible, will know your wishes, will be able to work with you and for you if the time arises. And communication becomes very important. And I don't know how many of you are here sitting as someone who has Parkinson's disease and the care partners or care partners, but communication becomes really important. And I think in many ways, we'll talk about, towards the end of the conversation, I'll talk about some of the stumbling blocks, that I would think some of the challenges might be. But communication is one. And communication, I feel like we all take for granted that there is so much room when we have chronic health issues, when we're, particularly when memory starts becoming apparent, or your concerns, or as the memory problems progress, that communication becomes really important between you and your care partner, between you and family, between you and your village, right? So communication. So there's lots of room to navigate and lots of opportunity to learn. And so again, I will extend an invitation that if people would like to meet one-on-one, or we meet together, family meetings are always an option, be able to craft this and to be able to talk about talking about feelings, talking about wishes, speaking openly and honestly about hard topics, like wishes when I don't have a voice, like my concerns about what might lie ahead for me. And these are hard, but I don't. My experience of I'll just say the Parkinson's community is that most people with Parkinson's disease don't shirk this. Strong advocates not only for the community, but for themselves. And this is something that we can work together on in terms of communication. And I would encourage you, whether it's me or someone else, that communication and thinking thoughtfully, being thoughtful about communication is an important piece. I think also the next steps are, particularly in the beginning stages of any memory changes, would be to find your peers and find your community. And that doesn't have to change. Sometimes the community might be like the American Parkinson Disease community, where you would be advocating, where you would be information gathering, where you would be fundraising for research, where you would be involved in gathering information. And it could start to change, where you would find a peer group of people who are having concerns about their memory. And we can talk about resources in terms of what's out there in order to maintain brain health. Brain health never changes. What we do in terms of, even after we've been given a diagnosis of memory changes, brain health becomes even more critical in terms of how we maintain and sustain our memories. And then as things change even more, a peer group who understands, who can talk to, you can speak about the memory changes. And then for care partners, also a peer group, and we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. So finding your peers and finding community, I think, becomes really essential. And exploring what the community, another step would be exploring what the community has to offer now and as needs change. So I often think about my experience working with I have done support groups for a long time. And one of the care partners was saying that, she really was a planner. And she felt really bad because she wanted to plan out what was coming next. And she was caring for her husband who had dementia. And she was saying, I feel really bad. My instinct is to plan this out. But I don't know. And the group itself said, absolutely, please plan. This is part of exercising all your strength at this particular moment. If you're a planner, things can be planned. Information can be gathered. The what ifs and this step, that's something that all steps might not be needed, but certainly plans can be put into place. And both the community in terms of emotional support and the community with very concrete services is out there and available. And to understand what is out there can certainly help you plan, whether you're talking about maybe needing a little bit more help now to help relieve some of the stress that you might be under in terms of housekeeping, shopping, now again with the resurgence. Things like that. As a care partner, maybe needing someone to come in to help so that you can get respite and some support. That it's available and it's out there. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Or in terms of what might be available in terms of living communities. What are the supportive communities out there? What do they look like? What's available to me in terms of care? And as my needs change, can I move somewhere independently? And then as my needs change, can this community support and keep up with my needs? That's another resource and important aspect, something to explore. And again, I say this at the very end, but I mentioned this in terms of communication. And I think it's really important to speak openly and candidly with your care partner. And I'm going to say that when you might see that line, and I might write that line, speak openly and candidly with your care partner, you're going to be thinking of your spouse. And there might be many of you out there who maybe do not have a spouse. It could be a son or a daughter. It could be a very close friend. It could be a cousin who partners with you to ensure that you are aware of what's out there, who can help you in terms of working through some of the challenges of not only a chronic health issue like Parkinson's disease, but maybe some memory changes that might accompany it. And as the memory changes change, speak openly and candidly to that care partner. Identify that care partner and then speak candidly with them. about if you can. I mean, I'm hoping that would be something that you could do. And if it's something that might not come easily initially, that's something that could be worked toward. Because again, that communication is key. And I think for those who are spouses, or maybe there might be adult children who are sitting with you today at this webinar, that to have an open dialogue. Now, I remember that this just kind of as a personal note, I remember when my mother wanted to set up her durable power of attorney for healthcare. It's hard for me. I didn't want to hear it. I'd be really quite honest. It's something that's hard to hear. But, she was saying, you have to hear this. And it's important. It's important to hear. It's important to plan. It's important to be connected. As hard as it is, that the challenge can be lessened if that partner and you can speak openly and candidly about what's going on. And we're always, again, the invitation, we're always here to help facilitate that. So I wanted to take a little deeper dive. I want to make sure I watch my time. A deeper dive in terms of this, and I won't take too much of a dive, but I did want to kind of segment this, take this out from those top 10. I kind of think about the top 10s in no particular order, but I feel like this can be so overwhelming that if we think about it in terms of chunks, and again, I encourage you to think about it in terms of chunks, that it might be helpful. And we don't have to take such big bites of things. We can take little bites. That if I were to you could start at any place in that list, but these are some of the very concrete things that can be done, that you can review, and that can be discussed with your village. You can take a look yourself. And this is, most of these forms will require you to be making this at a time when you are able to have these discussions with your care partners and with your village. So the durable power of attorney for healthcare, I put this link here, and I understand that this is a PowerPoint, but if you wanted to review this webinar, or you wanted to go, and sometimes I can provide the PowerPoint, but it'll be up. But if you go to the instituteforhumancaring.org, it's part of Providence, and they have a beautiful website that can, if you haven't already done this, that can walk you through. And it's a less frightening experience, a less concerning experience, and it takes you can download the forms, and it'll help and walk you through. The Dementia Healthcare Directive Addendum, which I spoke about, is another. It's called Value Tools. It's the Compassion and Choices site. It's really, this is an organization that is focusing on making sure that we all have control when we have voice, when we're able to speak for ourselves, and when we can no longer speak for ourselves, or when we have rights in terms of thinking about quality of life and making conscious decisions about that quality and about our living and about those choices. So the Dementia Healthcare Directive Addendum is really, I think, a really good tool, at least a tool to begin to talk about, if you have memory changes and you're gathering information, you're thinking about what comes next, how can you frame some of those questions about memory? If my memory gets to the point where, I can no longer ask for medication, these are the things that I'd like to be considered. It's just a really important document. And again, it's something that, if you wanted to sit with someone to go through, or at least take a peek at, to take a look at and see what might be available and the important questions that are being asked, really important. And I would encourage that. There's also the Dementia Decoder, which I mentioned. It's an interesting tool because it takes you through, like, these are the things that I want to talk, a long list of questions that you might ask your care provider, you might bring to Dr. Petrosian in terms of the dementia. I mean, I always encourage when I'm sitting with my clients to write a list of the questions that you might have, because sometimes when you get into the office, things can be overwhelming and there can be a lot of things that are happening. And this is the time when you really want to lean into Dr. Petrosian and Dr. Diaz and the resources and experts that they are. And the Dementia Decoder is one of those tools that can help you kind of ask questions and then come up with a list of questions that you can bring to your care provider. I have to say, as I was going through, I took it myself just to kind of go through and say, how would this work in terms of, and it asks a lot of different questions about, if we went in terms of, if I have memory changes and we're going to be talking about this kind of treatment, how would this affect my quality of life? Are there other options? Are there options besides medications? I mean, there's all these great things just to think about, kind of to broaden the breadth, I think, in terms of the control. And one of the questions that really kind of moved me was when a question was to ask your healthcare provider, do you understand my values that I have about, my quality of life? Do you understand where I'm coming from? Do you understand what my goals are here? Do you understand where I'm going? I would like you to come on with this journey. Do you understand them? And I think that's a really important question, an important discussion to have with your provider. And if not Dr. Petrosian, the other care providers, do they know? Is everybody on the same page in terms of what you're okay with and what you're not okay with, both in terms of the healthcare and both in terms of the memory changes? So now I'm going to switch gears, and I see that time is running away from us, but I do definitely want to talk a little bit about information for the care partner, because I know I'm lucky to be able to do a PRESS program, which is a 9-week course for those who are newly diagnosed. And there's an opportunity where we pull care partners aside. We usually encourage people to attend with a care partner so they can learn together and begin this journey and begin this communication in terms of sharing information about sometimes delicate issues, sometimes points of contention, because sometimes a care partner sees things differently than you might. It can be kind of challenging. It's all point of navigation, right? But most of the times when we do that, we have one of the sessions where we separate so that we can hear from the care partners themselves. And those who have Parkinson's disease are always concerned about their care partners. And care partners are always concerned about the person that they're caring for first and foremost. So it's important for me today to fold in, particularly when we're talking about memory changes, particularly when we're talking about next steps, particularly when we're talking about possible progression of memory, to shine a little bit of light on the care partner, to talk to you all, for those of you who have PD and those of you who have care partners, we can spend some time. That when we're talking to care partners, or I'm talking to all of you today, that it's an important part of the next step to fold care partners into this journey. That navigating a changing horizon is not easy for care partners, but I'm going to say to bring your compass. And your compass might be things that you're comfortable with, things that you're uncomfortable with, areas where I think primarily about self-care, using that as a compass, and using your body and using your mental health as well as a compass, both for the person with Parkinson's and for your care partners. That information is particularly important for care partners as things begin to change with memory. And consider your own village. And your village may absolutely be the same that we talked about for the person with Parkinson's disease, but it also could be different. And that's an important distinction. And it's okay to make that distinction and to create that village. You'll want to find fellow care partners for support and guidance. No one understands a care partner like another care partner, because things change and shift. Like I said, the challenge is always a moving target in terms of what the day might bring. And so having other care partners who understand and who can speak in shorthand oftentimes can be very, very important. I encourage all care partners to make self-care part of your vocabulary as soon as possible. That oftentimes, and many of us have been care partners, we've been partners with our parents, we've been partners with our spouses, we certainly in many ways have been care partners with our children, if you want to talk about in terms of how we've raised them. And I don't know that oftentimes when we're in that role of carer that we think of self-care. And I'm going to really encourage you to think about that and to make that part of your vocabulary. That's not something to be put on the back burner. That's not something to be put, for tomorrow. I would really encourage you to make that part of your vocabulary as soon as possible. And again, I will say the same thing to care partners, to support and encourage communication between you and your partner. When you can, as you can. Sometimes these conversations will be tender-hearted, and sometimes they might be just kind of, this is where I am, this is what's going on. But to be able to encourage that kind of communication, I always encourage care partners to go easy on yourself. That this is a tender time, and no one has to stand alone. No one stands alone in our community. We stand with each other, and we stand for each other. Whether we're grappling with the changes in memory, and whether we're care partners, whether we're changing in terms of what we can accomplish during a day, our fatigue level, whether it's the way that we get snagged in terms of what we're able to remember. No one stands alone in our community. So for care partners, I want to just take a deeper dive on this topic of no one has to stand alone, that there are tremendous resources for you at the American Parkinson's Disease Association, the different, the Parkinson's, Davis Phinney Foundation, Michael J. Fox. These are really wonderful, wonderful resources. The Alzheimer's Association, particularly when it's related to memory changes. We often think of those organizations as, only related to Alzheimer's disease, but they're not. They're for everyone. And I do want to say that there's lots to be found, particularly from the Davis Phinney Foundation. I'm particularly aware of how wonderful YouTubes and information for care partners. So I would encourage you to think about those and explore that. And I also want to say that at the Pacific Movement Disorder Center this year, particularly 2022, we're going to be developing programming exclusively for care partners this year. And we're really happy to work together as a team and to offer support groups starting Thursday, February 3rd. From 10 to 10:30 is kind of our maiden voyage and our maiden support meeting for care partners. So we hope that those of you who might be interested, the care partners who are participating today in this webinar, and those who have care partners, might encourage them to participate. And I will put my email up on the last slide. And I really encourage, if you'd like to be on an email list to get blasts in terms of what will be coming for care partners, and begin our the community work that we have to do in supporting one another, I would value your participation. So I would be open to your including you and being of service. So the takeaways for today, and see that time is we're moving ahead. The takeaways from today, and again, I didn't get very specific in terms of resources, but I'm hoping, and then again, I will invite you that we can talk about this we can talk about this on a one-to-one in terms of what might be available. And I'm happy to craft a plan or to help you craft the plan. But the takeaways for today would be that each of you have your own experience. It may or may not involve a diagnosis of dementia, but the questions that you have, the plans that you want to make, the plans that you have intentions of making are valid, and we want to honor those. And all this planning and all this information gathering for me is an important piece in maintaining and taking control of what you can. And I really, really encourage you to think about these things, that you are not alone, that you can craft and mobilize your village, however that village will look. The important part is that we explore opportunities, that you explore the people around you who can be, sometimes the team analogy gets a little tiring, but who is there for you and with you, who will stand beside you, who will be your voice. Include family. I put family because it may not be family, it may be friends. The relationship, and when we're talking about this, relationships, it may not matter necessarily, is it blood or is it someone chosen? That it's important that you think about who might be able to give voice to what your plans are, your wishes are, and to include the community. Like I talked about, informal and the formal community members. Another takeaway from today, I'm hoping that you'll take with you, is that care partners are critical and their support is essential. That it's that we all stand together, right? And that care partners share stress and hold their own stresses and their own concerns and their own fears. And today is a good day to talk about that, to introduce, make care partners part of that frame, and that self-care is essential. Bring that self-care into your own vocabulary today, as soon as you can. It's really critical. I can't tell you how important that is. But I really feel communication is key. Sharing wishes, fears, healthcare plans. I mean, we can talk about how important it is to just give voice to what might be something that you're holding. And I say that a little bit with caution because these might be tender topics. So you'll want to make sure that when you're choosing your village, you might choose your village and people might have different roles, but that if you have a confidant, someone that you can share this with, that would be really important. It would be important to give voice to what you might be holding close, and open to new, and hopefully that the communication, you'd be open to new communication and sharpening some skills. I mean, I just really feel like it's just points of navigation, an opportunity to learn and do things differently. And, I wanted to say, watch out for some roadblocks or bumps in the road. I think that fears can really keep us from making decisions that are quintessential in terms of planning. No matter where you are in terms of your PD journey and where you are in terms of any kind of memory changes, or if you're here concerned, if you have very specific questions, or if you're a care partner, watch out for roadblocks, the fears that might keep you, and the resistance to help. It's so hard. We are a society in general, a culture that says, I got this. And there's a lot of importance put on our independence. And I'm not saying that that's not important, because it is critical. But when things begin to change, when we've been given we have chronic health issues, and particularly when we have memory changes, it's important to be able to ask for help. It becomes critical, whether you're a care partner or whether you're a person with Parkinson's disease and with memory changes. So I want to thank you for your patience and for your attention today. I hope that this has given you some areas to focus, looking to your horizon, and that I put start now. One of the things that in my experience is that people will say, when will I know? When will I know it's time for this? When will I know? And, I always say that, if you're asked, if that question is formulated in your mind, when will I know it's time for me to pull in my son or daughter? When will I know if it's time to talk to my wife about my fears? When will I know that it's time to maybe think about some other kinds of care, maybe bringing somebody in, that you know intuitively that things are changing? And so I would, I thank you for your attention, and I look forward to being a partner with you on this journey.
Thank you, Sheila. That was fantastic. I don't see any questions yet that have popped in through our chat. So if you guys, those of you who've joined us, if you have questions, please, write them in the chat or in the Q&A. I did make a note in the chat, the website for webinars. We do have our webinars up from all the way through. So we will hopefully get this one up later this month with the links that Sheila mentioned. I think that those resources are really fantastic. I actually was looking through them myself, and I thought that the dementia-related advanced care directives was really interesting, because I think it really opens the questions for patients to consider, what can and cannot be an option for patients, because so many things are just sort of thought of as routine, like, oh, I'm just going to, treat this infection with antibiotics because it's sort of a low level or low intensity But some people who are very clear about not wanting to prolong life, it may not be appropriate to give them that an antibiotic because it's prolonging life if that's not something that they want. I get a lot of questions about things like hospice and advanced directives and things like that. So I really appreciate the resources. I think one thing I didn't hear you mention in your talk was the POLST form. So I don't know if you wanted to comment on that.
Oh, sure. The POLST is I'm not going to remember the physician's assistance, right, order that you can talk to your physician about so that you can, if you do not want your life prolonged, if there's a catastrophe, and Dr. Petrosi, you can jump in and help me with this too, that if it's a form that you can carry with you and have with you, particularly at home, particularly if needs have changed, so that you can have the opportunity to have that, your wishes, so that if, whether you're in a hospital setting or at home, and there's the opportunity for kind of that knee-jerk 911, we're going to do everything. For me, I think of it as the pause to be able to say, wait a minute, what are the wishes here? You've had a discussion with your physician. This is where I want to make sure I'm comfortable, and I don't want to have extraordinary measures, particularly those, like an emergency team would bring, so that comfort measures, and you speak about it with your physician. So your physician, like Dr. Petrosi, can speak from her experience with patients, but being able to have that communication and say, look, this is what Dr. Petrosi can support, and discuss what things might look like if you choose to do this. It's a one-page form that allows you to make sure your wishes are met. Please, Dr. Petrosi.
Yeah, so you summarized it very nicely. The way I like to differentiate it between a POLST form and an advanced directives is, as the name implies of advanced directives, the concept is I'm making I have an if-then scenario. So if I am in a state of whatever it is, you could use the word advanced dementia, or you could use the word, a lot of times the lawyers make those forms. So they're, to me, very vague and unhelpful, but there'll be things like, if there's no meaningful hope for neurological recovery is a very common phrase I've seen. I'm like, I don't know what that means. How do I know when somebody has lost hope? I mean, how can I ever say never? There's always a possibility, right? Very, very, very limited cases are there where there's truly zero hope for neurological recovery. And that kind of is a whole other topic of conversation, not really relevant to the Parkinson's population. And one of the most challenging things of dealing with advanced stages of Parkinson's is the roller coaster ride of the good days and bad days, and people will have a decline. And unfortunately, sometimes that decline is the beginning of, final days or the last few months or whatever. But also very commonly, if not, I would say more commonly, those bad days or the decline is actually related to something else, like medications or a urinary tract infection or a pneumonia or dehydrated or whatever, or no reason at all. And then they just get better. So, that roller coaster of not knowing when, people are going to be better or not better, or what is the future going to hold. It's a huge source of stress for my patients, because it really makes it hard for people to plan, like, well, what does this mean? And it just really emphasizes the concept of take it day by day, remain in communication with your team. And sort of, I think what Sheila has mentioned previously of, hoping for the best, but planning for the worst and things like that. But the concept of the advanced directives of an if-then. So if somebody has, a lost hope, blah, 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 then I do want this or I don't want that. But again, that's a little bit subject to interpretation, and it isn't a current, present, today conversation. The POLST form, by contrast, this is the order from a physician now. So it isn't a for the future, it's this is what I want today. So for example, if somebody is very clear that they would not want to be resuscitated if their heart were to stop, or would not want to be on a breathing machine if they were having difficulty breathing because of pneumonia or what have you, they can say, do not resuscitate. And what I like about that form, first of all, it's a hot pink form, so that hot pink form is kept, the original, by the patient in their room, in their kitchen, whatever, something that's very easily accessible. And it's not a future question. It is this is what I want now. And so those are two separate things, and they can be in parallel with each other. But I encourage people to ask, on their physicians, or I think there are some other websites that Sheila can share with that. So there is a question about any suggestions for denial and fear. I can't even start discussions because there is worry about having the conversation making people more upset. And that is a fantastic question for Sheila. So I'm going to stop talking and see if Sheila, we are a little bit over. So if people need to leave, we understand. But I think Sheila, let's take that last question. How do you manage denial? How do you manage when, your recommendation is have the conversation, but the conversation seems to be really upsetting?
Right. I think that, again, these are ginger conversations. So I think that for my recommendation would be to start having even conversations to lead up to the bigger ones, and kind of start just by beginning with something like, I know this is hard. I'm wondering if there's a time when we might be able to have a conversation about, and just leave it like that. I really would spend some time just being sensitive to those fears and those the denial. It's really hard, because I think that if there is, and this is again one of those questions probably that I'm happy to talk to you personally about. But sometimes if there are some memory changes, and sometimes having conversations will change, and initiating communication will be different. But that's a really good question. And, I think that, if you start, this is my vernacular, that you would start drip, dripping, starting to kind of open that door, but very, very gently. So you might say, and again, I just the beginnings, like, just like what I mentioned. I know it's a really difficult situation, but can we have the conversation? No, I don't want to. Okay. But just start out slow. Start out slow, and
One thing that I like to do is start the conversation in a general term. So I'll say things like, in general, I have patients who have dementia, or I have patients who have cognitive problems, but they're still highly intelligent, and they're still very well versed in doing some cognitive tasks, but they're struggling with other cognitive tasks. So opening that conversation as this is what can happen, or maybe as a family member would say something like, oh, my friend is telling me about such and such situation, and what do you think about what's going on with my friend, and it could be a fictional friend if necessary. And then the other question asked was, is the caregiver or family member able to have discussions with the patient's care team? And I'm assuming they mean sort of like outside of the conversation with the patient. And that's a really, really good question. Technically, HIPAA is the concept behind HIPAA about privacy and that kind of thing is that, in general, a patient has a right to not allow their information to be shared, even with a family member. If that person, the way I would frame it is, if somebody wants to give me information, I'm absolutely happy to take that information. Even if the patient does not give me information to share information, I can still receive information from a family member or other, friend or what have you, observer. So sometimes what I will do is I'll have a conversation and I will take information, and then I will not give personal information, but I will give general information. In general, these are the things that happen with Parkinson's patients, or these are some resources or things like that. I always try to get my patient to agree to the conversation, and I express the importance of that. And I also will sort of take an assumption that if somebody comes with their family member, that sort of implies consent for further conversations. If things are starting to appear that the patient no longer has full capacity to make medical decisions on their own, then by default, we will definitely have conversations with caregivers and family members in the order of the advanced care directives, if that's in place, if not with, for example, the spouse or the adult child or what have you. So the short answer is yes. But and I think Sheila as well, we're sort of incapable of giving short answers, aren't we?
It's hard.
Likely to color everything. And this is especially a very, very challenging topic. And Sheila, you really handled it very nicely, because everybody, I think, listening or in the future, people who are watching this webinar, everybody really has a slightly different situation or scenario that they're coming in on it. So thank you again for joining us, and I think we'll wrap up there, and look forward to next month. And I'll give you guys, hang on, give me just 1 second. I'll tell you what we're going to be talking about. So February, it's going to be on the 7th. And it's going to be registered dietitian Molly Raposo talking about nutrition. We've already done a little bit conversation previously about GI symptoms, gut-brain connection. We've talked a little bit about diet, but now we're going to have an actual registered dietitian to do a little bit more of a deep dive into nutrition-related concerns as relates to Parkinson's disease. So hope to see you all there, and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.
Bye-bye.